How in the world does a nation with a GDP smaller than many US cities repeatedly bring the wealthiest superpowers to their financial knees? It sounds like a riddle, right? But it's not. This is the incredible, often overlooked story of how Afghanistan, famously dubbed the graveyard of empires, became a relentless black hole for treasuries, swallowing trillions of dollars and leaving behind a legacy of economic ruin for those who dared to enter. Imagine, just for a second, writing a check so staggeringly large it could wipe out every single student debt in the United States, then completely modernize every American bridge and piece of crumbling infrastructure and still have enough left over to vaccinate the entire planet against whatever the next big bug might be. Now picture watching that colossal sum of money, that monumental investment, simply vanish into the jagged peaks and hidden valleys of the Hindu Kush, a place, let's be honest, most voters can't even spell, let alone pinpoint on a map. That, my friends, is the essence of the Forgotten Empire. It's not an empire in the traditional sense, not one that conquers lands or builds monuments. No, this is an empire that exhausts, an empire that outlasts, an empire whose secret weapon isn't a vast army, but an unparalleled capacity to drain the coffers of even the mightiest nations. Britain, the Soviet Union, America, each one marched in with an almost limitless supply of confidence, convinced of their own strategic brilliance and overwhelming power, and each, in turn, limped out, their treasuries hemorrhaging, their grand ambitions shattered, and their global prestige diminished. Today, we're going to follow the money. We're going to peel back the layers of military strategy and geopolitical maneuvering to reveal the cold, hard economic reality of why Afghanistan has proven to be the ultimate global giant's trap. It's a story not just of military might, but of fiscal exhaustion and the relentless grind of a land that refuses to be bought or broken. This is the Forgotten Empire, how Afghanistan bankrupted superpowers. Welcome to Empire Secrets. Let's rewind to the 19th century. The British Empire, at its absolute zenith, ruled over vast oceans and continents, its flag fluttering over a quarter of the globe. But the Afghan budget sheet, that was a beast of an entirely different nature. London's first ill-fated invasion in 1839 wasn't about conquest for conquest's sake. It was a desperate move in the Great Game, a shadowy, high-stakes geopolitical chess match with Tsarist Russia for influence over Central Asia. The British feared Russian expansion towards their prized jewel, India, and saw Afghanistan as a crucial buffer state. They wanted a friendly, pliant ruler in Kabul, and they were prepared to install one by force. The cost of this initial foray? A staggering £11 million at the time. Now that might sound modest by today's standards, but let's put it into perspective. That sum represented about 1% of the entire imperial GDP. Think about that for a moment. 1% of the economic output of the largest empire the world had ever seen. All for a mountainous, seemingly insignificant country. To truly grasp the magnitude, consider this. That same £11 million could have funded the construction of 120 cutting-edge, ironclad warships, the dreadnoughts of their era, or bankrolled the entire Royal Navy for 3 full years. Instead, that money was poured into a desolate landscape, financing an invasion that ended in utter catastrophe. Around 16,000 British and Indian soldiers, along with their camp followers, marched confidently into Kabul, believing they were bringing order and British influence. Less than a year later, in the brutal winter retreat of 1842, only one European survivor, a Dr. William Brydon, famously staggered back to the British garrison at Jalalabad, a living testament to the wholesale annihilation of an entire army. The sheer scale of the loss, the humiliation, sent shockwaves across the empire. It wasn't just a military defeat, it was an economic black eye and a profound blow to British prestige. Did they learn their lesson? Not entirely. Britain tried again in 1878, launching the Second Anglo-Afghan War, driven by renewed fears of Russian influence and a desire to secure their borders. This second attempt burned through another £17 million and tragically lost the lives of another 10,000 soldiers. While this war ended with a slightly less disastrous outcome for the British, it still failed to establish lasting control or a truly stable pro-British regime. The financial hemorrhage continued year after year, with skirmishes, garrisons, and diplomatic efforts proving endlessly expensive. By 1919, after the Third Anglo-Afghan War, a conflict that erupted partly from Afghan desires for full independence following World War I, Britain was finally forced to concede complete Afghan autonomy. The cost of these three wars in modern money rings in at roughly £3.5 billion, a sum that, while substantial, pales in comparison to the later bills racked up by other superpowers. Yet it was more than enough to convince London that holding India, with all its vast resources and strategic importance, was ultimately far cheaper than trying to tame its fiercely independent, mountainous neighbour. The lesson was stark, painful, and etched into imperial memory. Afghanistan isn't a colony you can simply annex and exploit. It's a luxury item, a prestige project, and one that absolutely no one, not even the mighty British Empire, could truly afford. The economic drain, the manpower losses, and the constant threat of renewed conflict made it an unsustainable venture, forever altering Britain's strategic calculus in the region. The mountains had claimed their first imperial treasury. But if Britain's empire thought it was alone in bleeding money over these mountains, it was only the beginning, because another superpower with even deeper pockets was about to repeat the same mistake. Fast forward a century, it's Christmas, 1979. The Cold War is in full swing, and the global chessboard is tense. Soviet tanks, gleaming and formidable, roll across the Amu Darya River, pouring into Afghanistan. The Kremlin, ever confident in its military might and ideological superiority, fully expect a swift, decisive 3-month police action to prop up a floundering pro-Soviet government in Kabul and extend their influence in a strategically vital region. They envisioned a quick, surgical-like show of force, and then a triumphant return. They stayed a decade. What began as a calculated political intervention quickly devolved into a brutal, protracted quagmire, a Soviet Vietnam. The economic cost was simply staggering. The Kremlin pumped an estimated 9 billion rubles into the war, and that's not a one-time figure. We're talking about roughly 1.5% of the annual Soviet GDP, every single year for 10 years. To put that into perspective, that translated into a jaw-dropping 20% of total Soviet military spending at a time when ordinary citizens in Moscow were already lining up for hours just to get basic necessities like bread. The Soviet economy, already struggling under the weight of central planning and a costly arms race with the West, was buckling under this immense, unexpected burden. The war itself was a logistical nightmare and a constant drain. Helicopters, the pride of Soviet air power, fell from the treacherous mountain passes, brought down by sophisticated American-supplied Stinger missiles. Supply trucks, vital for sustaining the vast Soviet force, burned at 10,000 feet, ambushed by tenacious Mujahideen fighters who knew every rock and crevice of their homeland. The human cost was equally devastating. Approximately 15,000 body bags, each containing a young Soviet soldier, returned home, often in secret, to a populace increasingly delusioned by the war. Adding insult to injury, international sanctions led by the United States slammed an already vulnerable Soviet economy, which was dangerously addicted to oil exports. This hit came just as global crude prices began to collapse in the mid-1980s, creating a perfect storm of financial pressure. The revenue streams that the USSR relied upon to fund its military adventures and maintain its vast empire were drying up. By 1986, the Politburo, the inner circle of Soviet power, privately admitted that the war was costing an astronomical $2.5 million per day, a sum that shockingly exceeded the entire Afghan government's yearly revenue. They were literally spending more each day to fight a war in Afghanistan than the country itself generated in an entire year. The Red Army, demoralized and defeated, finally withdrew in 1989, leaving behind a shattered country and a deeply scarred Soviet Union. 2 years later, in 1991, the USSR itself dissolved. Coincidence? Ask any Politburo veteran and any historian who lived through that era, and they'll tell you emphatically no. The mountain quagmire bled the Soviet treasury white, accelerating the demand for economic and political reform that Gorbachev was trying to implement, and utterly shattering the illusion of imperial inevitability that had underpinned Soviet power for decades. The Soviet experience in Afghanistan vividly demonstrated that a superpower, even one with immense military and economic resources, simply couldn't impose an incompatible political and economic system on a deeply traditional, fiercely independent society. Their efforts to build infrastructure and support Afghan security forces ultimately failed to create a sustainable economy or a skilled labor force, leaving behind a nation dependent on foreign aid and ripe for future conflict. The war's drain on Soviet resources is widely considered a significant, if not primary factor in the eventual collapse of the USSR. But the mountains weren't finished collecting their due. Another empire, far wealthier and far more confident, was already on its way, armed with the biggest checkbook in human history. Fast forward again, this time to September 12, 2001. The Twin Towers had just fallen, the Pentagon was burning, and a nation reeling from an unimaginable attack wrote a blank check emblazoned with two powerful words: never again. The mission was clear: dismantle al-Qaeda, remove the Taliban regime that harbored them, and prevent Afghanistan from ever again becoming a safe haven for terrorists. The initial invasion was swift and devastatingly effective. But then, the mission began to evolve. What started as a focused counter-terrorism operation gradually morphed into an ambitious, sprawling nation-building project. 20 years later, that blank check had been filled in, and the total read a mind-boggling $2.3 trillion. Let that number sink in. $2.3 trillion. That's roughly $115 million every single day for 2 decades. To give you a truly human perspective, that sum was theoretically enough to give every single Afghan citizen a lifetime middle-class salary. Instead, it was poured into a war that, by its end, saw the Taliban back in power, largely unchecked. And here's where the numbers start defying logic and gravity. So, where did all that money go? It's a question that haunts congressional auditors and taxpayers alike. Let's break down some of the biggest chunks. $800 billion in direct military operations. This covered everything from bombs and bullets to troop salaries, fuel, and intelligence gathering. It was the cost of fighting a war in one of the most geographically challenging environments on Earth, against an enemy that blended seamlessly into the local population. $85 billion to train and equip Afghan forces. The grand vision was to build a self-sufficient Afghan national army and police capable of securing their own country. This massive investment brought them uniforms, weapons, vehicles, and training. Yet, when the chips were down in 2021, these forces often melted away, surrendered, or simply deserted, leaving their expensive equipment to the very enemy they were meant to fight. Why? Persistent corruption, lack of loyalty to a central government perceived as illegitimate, and the sheer tenacity of the insurgency proved insurmountable. $36 billion on roads and infrastructure. The idea was sound: build roads, schools, clinics, and power grids to win hearts and minds and foster economic development. But too often, these roads would crumble within a single monsoon season, built with shoddy materials by contractors with little oversight. The research context highlights this perfectly. A single clinic, costing $1.5 million, was built without verifying land ownership, only for locals to quickly convert it into a sheep barn. It's a stark, almost darkly comedic illustration of wasted resources and a profound disconnect from local realities. $10 billion for counter-narcotics programs. The US poured billions into eradicating poppy fields and disrupting the drug trade, which funded the insurgency. The ironic, tragic outcome: opium production reached record highs by the end of the intervention. Warlords, local strongmen, and desperate farmers found ways around every effort, often with the complicity of corrupt officials. The logistical costs were simply mind-boggling. Imagine a single fuel convoy making its perilous journey from the port of Karachi in Pakistan to a forward operating base in Kandahar, Afghanistan. Once you factored in exorbitant security contracts for private military companies, the endless bribes paid to local militias and officials for safe passage, and the occasional helicopter airlifts needed to bypass impassable terrain or ambush sites, that gallon of fuel, which might cost a few dollars at the pump, could end up costing $400. $400 a gallon. It's a testament to the layers of graft, risk, and logistical nightmare that defined the war. And then there was the sheer, unadulterated waste. Congressional auditors trying to make sense of the chaos found a staggering $19 billion simply unaccounted for. Financial vapor, gone without a trace. It wasn't just inefficiency, it was a black hole of corruption and mismanagement. By 2021, the bitter truth was undeniable. The Taliban, the very regime America had set out to dismantle, controlled more territory than they had in 2001. As Washington hastily withdrew, leaving behind a fleet of 27,000 Humvees, 600,000 small arms, and enough bullets to fight World War I twice, the world watched a strategic and moral defeat unfold. The US experience, much like the Soviet one, underscored the limits of external military intervention and nation-building in Afghanistan. Despite overwhelming power, the complex local realities, the tribal dynamics, the pervasive corruption, and the entrenched insurgency made sustainable control elusive, leading to a costly withdrawal and an uncertain future. The geography, internal dynamics, and regional pressures, as our research context notes, combined to create an intractable problem that even the world's sole superpower couldn't solve with money alone. So, why does Afghanistan consistently chew through superpower treasuries like a financial shredder? It's not one single factor, but a perfect storm of challenges, each compounding the others. First, let's talk geography. Afghanistan is landlocked, a rugged, mountainous country with some of the most unforgiving terrain on the planet. This isn't just a picturesque detail, it's a logistical nightmare. Every single bullet, every MRE, or meal ready to eat, every roll of toilet paper, every piece of heavy machinery, it all has to cross at least two, often hostile borders. Think about the journey, from a port city through potentially unstable neighboring countries, over mountains and across deserts, often on poorly maintained roads or no roads at all. This means relying on long, vulnerable supply lines, which are expensive to secure and constantly targeted by insurgents. The sheer cost of transportation, fuel, and protecting those convoys is astronomical, inflating every single item by orders of magnitude. The Hindu Kush isn't just a mountain range, it's a colossal, unyielding barrier to efficient logistics. Second, there's politics, specifically the insidious role of contractors. When a superpower engages in a conflict, especially a long one, it increasingly relies on private contractors for everything, from security to logistics to construction. These companies operating in war zones factor in massive war risk insurance premiums. They also face incredible dangers and often have to operate with less oversight than military personnel. Consequently, they charge allied governments 10, 20, even 50 times the local rates for services. Why? Because they can. There's often a revolving door between military and government officials, and these private companies, creating a system where lucrative contracts are awarded with little competitive pressure, the incentive isn't always efficiency. It's often profit, and the taxpayer ends up footing the bill for inflated costs and sometimes substandard work. Third, and perhaps most corrosive, is corruption. It's not an exaggeration to say that corruption became an industry in Afghanistan. A senior Afghan minister once famously, and somewhat wryly, joked that the real national export of Afghanistan wasn't opium or carpets, but invoices. He meant that every project, every contract, every transaction was an opportunity for kickbacks, bribes, and illicit enrichment. From the highest levels of government to local police checkpoints, money intended for development or security would simply vanish into a labyrinth of illicit hands. This corruption didn't just drain resources, it undermined trust, alienated the population from their own government, and fueled the insurgency, which often presented itself as a cleaner, albeit brutal, alternative. When aid money is siphoned off and projects are poorly executed due to graft, it doesn't win hearts and minds. It breeds resentment and cynicism. Fourth, we have mission creep. This is a classic trap in protracted conflicts. What starts as a tightly defined, achievable objective, like capture Osama bin Laden, gradually mutates, expands, and becomes increasingly ambitious and vague. Before you know it, the mission has transformed into build a gender-sensitive federal democracy in a country that has never had a census, has deep tribal divisions, and a long history of resisting central authority. Every new objective, no matter how well-intentioned, girls' schools, solar microgrids, even bizarre rule of law sitcoms, designed to educate the populace, adds new line items to the budget. Crucially, these new objectives are rarely accompanied by the cancellation of earlier, often failed ones. The goals pile up, the costs compound, and the original, achievable mission becomes obscured by an ever-growing list of impossible tasks. Finally, and perhaps most insidiously, there's time. The longer a superpower stays, the more expenses compound, much like credit card debt with ever-increasing interest. A 20-year deployment means you're not just paying for initial equipment, you're paying to replace the replacement of the replacement. Vehicles wear out, infrastructure degrades, personnel rotate through, requiring constant training and logistical support. The human cost also compounds, with long-term healthcare for veterans, psychological support, and pensions adding to the national ledger for decades after the last soldier comes home. The long-term presence creates a self-perpetuating economic machine, one that becomes incredibly difficult to stop, even when its effectiveness is clearly diminishing. But what if that's the point? What if Afghanistan's real weapon isn't war at all, but patience? Here's the thing about Afghanistan. Its people rarely defeat invaders in decisive, glorious set-piece battles. You won't find many accounts of vast Afghan armies routing superpower legions in open fields. Their genius, their secret weapon, is far more subtle, far more insidious, and ultimately, far more effective. They win by making the occupier's budget scream. It's a death by 1,000 invoices, a relentless war of fiscal attrition. Imagine this: a local insurgent sabotages a $10 gas canister meant for a generator. That seemingly small act then forces the superpower to mount a $10,000 airborne resupply mission, complete with helicopters, specialized personnel, and the inherent risks of flying in a hostile environment. Or consider the local villagers demanding a $200 goat toll from a passing military convoy. That seemingly minor demand can delay a $2 million convoy for hours, disrupting schedules, increasing fuel consumption, and exposing personnel to prolonged danger. Now multiply that by 365 days a year, then multiply it by 20 provinces, then multiply it by 2 decades. The cumulative effect is absolutely staggering. It's not about winning a battle, it's about making every single operational cost, every logistical movement, every security measure disproportionately expensive. The goal isn't battlefield victory in a conventional sense, it's to convince the enemy's treasury, deep in a distant capital, that the entire project, the occupation, nation building, the counterinsurgency, is simply unaffordable. This strategy works because it exploits the fundamental economic realities of external intervention. An occupying force, especially a modern, technologically advanced one, operates under a completely different cost structure than local insurgents. They have to pay for high-tech equipment, highly trained personnel, extensive logistics, and maintain a standard of living for their troops that is vastly higher than that of their adversaries. Insurgents, on the other hand, operate on a shoestring budget, relying on local knowledge, simple weapons, and the inherent advantages of fighting on their own home turf. Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States, 3 empires spanning different centuries, driven by vastly different ideologies and armed with wildly different calculators, all eventually reached the same crushing conclusion. The cost of staying in Afghanistan simply outweighed any conceivable benefit. The mountains didn't need to conquer them, they just needed to drain them dry. They understood that the most potent weapon wasn't a rifle or a tank, but the relentless, soul-crushing weight of an unsustainable ledger. It's a lesson that history, time and again, has tried to teach the world's most powerful nations, often to their immense financial detriment. So there you have it, 3 empires, 3 centuries, and one utterly undeniable, unyielding pattern. The story of Afghanistan isn't just a series of military campaigns, it's a profound, repeated lesson in the economics of imperial overreach. The cost of conquering Afghanistan, of trying to impose an external will on its rugged terrain and fiercely independent people, has consistently, overwhelmingly exceeded the value of anything you could ever hope to extract from it. Afghanistan endures. It's not rich, not modern in the Western sense, and certainly not without its own profound challenges. But it remains unbroken and unbought. Its spirit, its resilience, its unique ability to simply outlast every foreign intervention is its greatest strength. The true Afghan empire, the one that truly matters, is invisible. It's an empire of outlasting, of out-budgeting, of out-frowning the spreadsheet optimists in distant capitals who always believe this time will be different. Next time you hear a politician, any politician, promise a swift, affordable, low-cost intervention somewhere rugged and remote, a place with complex tribal dynamics, a history of resistance, and challenging geography, remember the ledger we've traced today. Remember the trillions, the lives, the lost opportunities. The mountains don't need to win battles. They don't need to conquer. They just need to wait. They wait until your treasury waves the white flag, until your political will crumbles, until the cost becomes simply too high to bear. And they always do. If this deep dive into runaway budgets and mountain stubbornness shocked you as much as it shocked me, or if it simply made you think differently about the true cost of war, then hit that subscribe button and check out the other hidden empires on this channel. Every video follows the money, from war zones to boardrooms. This is Empire Secrets. Your desire, your empire.